this morning with Charlotte Rance, who will be focusing on developing speaking and fluency skills. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to write them in the chat box and we will do our best to answer your questions. I'll pass it over to Charlotte now. Thank you.
Let's put my camera on and focus it at my face. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so how are we all this morning? As usual, for those of you that have been to my webinars before, I like to start with a quick sound check. So if you can hear me, tell me where in the world you are and what time it is. Let's have a look at who's in our session this morning. Good morning, Ali from Egypt. How are we? Good morning, Justine. Dr. Singh's back. Hello. How is 11:30 in Dubai looking this morning? 10:30 in Saudi, 10:30 in Moscow. Do svidaniya, Moscow. Hello, good morning. 10:30 in Iraq. Morning in Croatia. 2:30 in the afternoon in Siberia, in Novosibirsk. Lovely Novosibirsk. Good morning. I do not even know where Togliatti is. Can someone tell me that? I don't know. Oh dear. Natalia, where are you? My Cyrillic writing and reading there was a bit of a challenge this morning. 9:30 a.m. in Egypt. Good. 1 p.m. in India. And hello, Eugenia. It is nice to hear from you too. And it is a beautiful, beautiful name you have there, Eugenia. Ah, Samara. I have been to Samara. That's strange. Okay. Right. Anyway, enough of our geography lesson this morning. So we are here to talk about developing speaking and fluency skills. We're going to start with a simple but useless mathematics problem. So I know we're all English teachers, and I know that for some of us it's quite early in the morning, but if I can hand over to you, I'm going to give you a little mathematics equation to complete. So all I want you to do is write your answer to this question in the chat box. If you take the number of minutes in your average lesson and divide that by the number of students in your class, what is the maximum speaking time that each student in your classroom would receive? So, for example, if your lesson is typically 40 minutes long and you have typically 20 students in your class, then 40 divided by 20 would give us 2, which gives us the maximum speaking time. Now, I will openly say this is a useless equation. As you well know, this equation makes a lot of assumptions. Number one, we're assuming that nobody in the classroom is speaking at the same time as someone else in your classroom. We're also assuming that the only thing we are doing in this classroom is student speaking. We're also assuming that we, as the teacher, do not speak. We're assuming there are no technical issues. We're making a lot of assumptions here. But there we go. We've got some answers in the chat box. So 6 minutes, 5 minutes. We've got some down at 1 or 2 minutes. Some down at 1.5 minutes. Oh my goodness. There. Yeah, it's a useless equation. But what it does show us is that in a classroom, the time we can use for speaking and the time we can use for student speaking is limited from the outset. Now, my best friend received an email from a parent this week, and I'm curious if any of you have had similar emails. She got an email from a parent who said that she was very disappointed because in the online English lesson the other day, she only heard her daughter speak 2 times. And my friend was quite upset by this because, of course, she's a teacher and we teachers do all of our best to make sure that we are maximising opportunities for students to speak in lessons. So she was quite upset, and she pointed out to me, I have 30 students in my online class. I do everything I can to make sure that they have a good opportunity to speak. And yet, after my lesson, this parent has complained that I have not given her daughter enough opportunity. What are we supposed to do? And I think we've all felt like that sometimes. I know certainly I have. So, in our session this morning, we are going to be looking at what we can do to maximize opportunities for speaking online. We're going to be thinking about what interactions happen in our classroom and how we can create those meaningful interactions. And then we're going to have a look at a number of different techniques that we can use to encourage speaking in our classrooms. So if you are ready, let's go. And I'm going to start by handing over to you. Hey, Hassan is ready. Well done, Hassan. I'm ready too. You and we will get through this. It will be fine. Okay, so on the screen, a question for you. I know you have all thought about this before, but in an online classroom, what sort of things have you been doing to maximize opportunities for speaking? In the chat box, any ideas that you have recently used to help your students speak more. Maybe at the beginning of class, you nominate students to do an introduction. Maybe you've been using the breakout rooms in Zoom to have lots and lots of pair and group work. Ooh, minimizing TTT and maximizing STT. Ali, I'm not going to lie. That is my constant struggle. It is the battle that I fight every day. How do I stop me talking? Warming up, absolutely. Lots of nice little warm up games. Sima, you feel that pain too. Yeah, some of us are just talkers. It can be such a challenge to just shut up sometimes, can't it? Clear instructions, fantastic, Sharif. We're going to talk about this a bit today as well. Yeah, completely agree. A lot of the problems in our classroom is it comes from maybe the way that we set up our tasks. So yeah, Sharif, you've also mentioned a safe environment, and that's brilliant. Sima, zero response from the students. Can be a challenge. Being encouraging to low-level students, indeed. Presenting pictures for discussion, fantastic. I love this. So we're all on the same page. We're all naturally trying to make sure we are maximizing the speaking. Conducting speaking skills activities like debates, absolutely lovely. Although can be a real challenge with young learners and low level students, but definitely possible. Providing essentials questions. I like it. It's nice. Sharif, you're on good form this morning. I'm enjoying that. Right. So here we go. I sat down and I had a thought about it, and a lot of the ideas that you have come up with are the same ideas that I came. So having a clear skills focused. Natalia has just mentioned name 5, and that's really good technique. Making sure that our instructions are very, very targeted. So instead of saying to your students, what did you do at the weekend? We say to our students, name 5 things you did at the weekend. And it gives them just a little bit of clarity, a little bit of focus. Knowing what we want to practice. Yes, Hassan, the file will be sent at the end of the webinar. You'll get all of the slides. You'll also get a link to the recording as well. Of course, reducing our teacher talk. I maintain that there is good teacher talk and not so good teacher talk. So my mission is to keep good teacher talk high whilst reducing useless teacher talk. So little things that bad habits I know I have. Um, Sometimes when I ask a question and my students don't give me an answer, I give the answer. There's one example there that I try to do less of. So that's called echoing. I try to not echo my students too much. Try not to answer the questions that I've got. Reducing teacher talk time. Obviously, the less we talk, the more they can talk. Increasing pair and group work. If we're not talking to students one-on-one, if they are talking to each other, everybody's talk time is maximized. So of course we want to see lots of that. Planning interactions. Now, this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit, but this is something that I only started to do later in my teaching career. You know, I'd go, okay, yeah, this is going to be a pair task, this is going to be a group task, but I didn't really think to myself, how am I going to make sure that I am not involved? And of course, the final thing on my list is creating a need. If there is no need to talk, why should my students be talking? So things like information gaps, where student A has one piece of information, student B has another piece of information, and they have to talk to each other. An information gap, a need for speaking. Now, we're all on the same page, and we all want to make sure that our students' speaking is maximized, but we're not always certain what to do. So let's have a think. Now, Carol Reed, who, if you're not familiar with her, she is a language teacher and she's expert in very young learners and young learners. And she's one of Macmillan's authors. And in one of her books, she mentions the difference between spoken production and spoken interaction. And in this book, 500 Activities for the Primary Classroom, which is a lovely book. If you haven't read it, it's very good. She states that speaking skills can broadly be placed into these two categories. In the classroom, we're either trying to encourage spoken production or we're trying to encourage spoken interaction. And these two skills are equally important in terms of speaking. Over to you. What's the difference between spoken production and spoken interaction? How would you define those differences? Let's see. I think there is a clear difference in those two ideas, but it's sometimes very difficult to know where the edges of those two things are. When does spoken production turn into spoken interaction? Let's see, I'm going to have a sip of my coffee in my ridiculously big cup. All right, we've got someone typing, so let's find out what they're going to say. It's all very exciting, isn't it? You're never quite sure who's going to say what. I don't know. Monologue and dialogue. Okay, all right. I like that, Natalia. There's a clear line. So, spoken production, you're speaking for yourself. Spoken interaction, you're speaking for somebody else. Spoken interaction presupposes dialogue. Absolutely. It definitely shows that there's someone else involved, doesn't it? So, Carol Reed goes on to define spoken production as essentially just students producing language. This can range from simple utterances such as the teacher showing a flashcard and the student saying the one word that represents it. rhymes that they have learned that they're reciting, describing something in front of them, retelling stories, essentially just using language. Whereas spoken interaction, as Natalia pointed out, there's a presupposition of dialogue. So spoken interaction is stuff like asking and answering questions, handling exchanges, communicating ideas, negotiating, discussing. There needs to be two people involved for spoken interaction to happen. Now, we can break this down a little bit further. Is anybody familiar with this here? This is what is known as the oral language pie, and it was developed by someone called Sue McClandish. Now, it's a framework for developing oral language. So we talked a little bit about spoken production and spoken interaction, and if we look at the top half of the pie, listening and responding, vocabulary and concepts, a lot of our spoken production is in the top half here. Whereas our spoken interaction, talking about the world around me, building talk for thinking, this is the social interaction, the spoken interaction side of the pie. Now, if we think about an online classroom, which of the two is easier to manage? Is it easier to manage spoken production online or spoken interaction online? Is it easier to get our students to listen and respond, so show a flashcard and get them to call out, or is it easier to get them talking about things? And I think for me personally, in an online situation, getting students to produce language is much easier than it is to get them to interact. Yeah, spoken production, as Anastasia says, is easier, much easier. Indeed. Yeah, much, 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 much easier. So in our online classroom, trying to challenge students to use language for communication, to use language for spoken interaction, is a much bigger challenge to us. And this is what I would like to focus on for the rest of the session. Now, on the screen, what we can see is a number of patterns of classroom interaction. So, who can we talk to in our classroom? Excuse me one second. That's better. Clear my throat. Got a little frog talking too much. Patterns of classroom interaction. So, as a teacher in my classroom, I can talk to individual students, talking to students one-on-one. This is an opportunity for students to practice their spoken interaction. I, as the teacher, can also communicate with small groups within my classroom. So if I'm working on a round robin, if my students are in a group task in the classroom, I, as a teacher, can circulate and I can speak to small groups of my students and interact that way. I also have the platform as a teacher to be able to interact with the class as a whole. Now, if we look at that, the interaction of an individual student is going down in level. So when I'm talking to a student one-on-one, their interaction is quite high. If I'm talking in a group, their interaction is slightly more limited. And if I'm talking to the whole class, that interaction is very difficult indeed. It requires a lot more management. But in the online classroom, it feels like the easiest way to do things. So just like we are now, I'm here as the teacher talking on the microphone, and the whole of the group, all of you, are being invited to add your answers. Now, bit of a challenge, admittedly. Most of us don't teach a classroom with 100, 200, 300 people in it. So obviously, in the classroom, you might have your mics on, but if we're talking like this, it's very tricky for everybody to share their opinion. And of course, not everybody wants to share their opinion. Some of us are listeners. Some of us want to read and want to hear what's happening, but we don't want to interact personally, and that's fine. So let's think about the student possibilities for interactions. As a student, if you are the one leading the conversation, you have a slightly bigger pool of possibilities. You might be talking to the teacher one-on-one. You might be talking to another student in a pair. You might be talking in a small group to other students, or you as a student might be talking to the whole class. And it is these interactions, the student-led interactions, that we should be planning for in our lesson plans. So we mentioned that planning for interaction is a good way to make sure that we are maximizing those opportunities for speaking. So when we're planning our lessons, sitting down and thinking about who the student is going to be talking to at every stage of the lesson. As Natalia has said, yeah, some students are bad listeners, but they're good with visuals. Indeed. So conversation can always be a challenge, but if they're communicating through writing or if they're given pictures to talk about, that can be a real boost. Now, we can also talk about the things that teachers do to support and encourage interaction in the classroom. And at the beginning, when we were talking about the things we do, I think it was Sharif who mentioned creating a safe environment. A safe environment where we want to be talking. So things that teachers should and could be doing in the classroom, even in the online classroom, to make sure that our students are confident in sharing their information. Number one, showing genuine interest. Now, there's always that little joke that I come back to where the student walks into the class and they tell the English teacher, "My English teacher, I'm so sorry. I am late today because my dog is died." And the teacher says, "No, you're late today because your dog is dead." And they correct the English and they don't listen to the message. Part of encouraging interaction, part of moving production from interaction is showing interest, listening to what our students are trying to tell us, listening to the message and responding to the message, not just responding to the language they have used. And not only that, responding positively. If any of you are interested in drama, you might be familiar with the rule in improvisation, the rule of yes and. To keep a conversation flowing, positivity is important. In an improvised conversation, if I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late," an alien came down from space and parked in front of my car, the job of the other person is to not say, "No, that's impossible," because "no, that's impossible" will kill the conversation. If we say, "Oh my goodness, tell me more," then that's going to encourage further discussion. And the same is true in the classroom. Yes, and I hear what you're saying. I am positive about what you're saying. Tell me more about it. Sharif mentions keeping emotional stability. Yeah, absolutely. And that positive response really, really helps. Now, a few of you mentioned pictures, prompts, cues. Absolutely. This can be something as a smile to show that you are recognizing and hearing. It might be a hand, simple, "Tell me more." It could be a picture that they're using to prompt as well. But what can we do to encourage students to solve their own problems? Um, I was playing a game of I Went to Market online recently, and one of the items, because I presume you all know it, the game I went to market, so I went to market and I bought. I went to market and I bought a cup. I went to market and I bought a cup and an umbrella. I went to market and I bought a cup, an umbrella, and a hairbrush, etc. I had a student who had forgotten one of the words, and the word was bear. And I don't know if you can remember, if you realize, but behind me, that side, just on top of my shelf, is a bear. So I was sat here helping the student with prompts and clues, pointing to the bear behind me, not saying anything, waiting for that student to produce. Now, of course, we're talking about young learners. Young learners are the center of their world. The topics that we talk about in a classroom, we are limited by young learner development in the things that they are capable of talking about. They haven't developed the idea of being able to put themselves in other people's shoes. They're learning empathy skills. They're learning imagination skills. So it's really important within our classroom that we keep the topic meaningful and meaningful to our learners. And of course, as we've already mentioned, information gaps. Now, we're going to have a look at a number of different techniques that are recommended in the series Talk About Texts. You've probably heard me talk about texts before. I also love saying talk about texts because it reminds me of a pop song. I'm not even sure. But these ideas are all taken from Talk About Texts. And if you remember the oral language pie, the oral language pie is a fundamental building block of the methodology in Talk About Texts. So when the course was developed, they tried to include activities which support each of the four corners of the oral language pie. So activities that promote listening and responding, activities that support vocabulary and concepts, building thinking, and also talking about the world around us. Now, this technique is a technique called Share It. And it's a nice little quick fire thinking and speaking task, which we are going to use in the rest of the session. So if you hear me saying share it during the rest of the session, what I would like you to do is do exactly what the students would do in the classroom. So when you share it, you've got three choices. You can share a question that you have about something. You can share an observation that you have about something, or you can share a feeling that you have about something. And in the classroom, if we're in a physical classroom, when the teacher says share it, the idea is that the student would turn to their partner, the person next to them, and either share a question, an observation, or a feeling that they have. In an online classroom, we type in the chat box. And if you're doing this technique in your classroom online, you'd get your students to type their answers or put their hand up or say what they want to do. And then you'd call on them one by one for their feedback and their ideas. So during the rest of the session, if I say share it, please share, please. Okay, let's go. All right, now this good. I've got Althea. She has said, okay, thank you, Althea. I'm very pleased you are going to share. All right, so we talked a little bit, someone mentioned at the beginning about the share five technique or think of five technique, that specific thinking task that goes with the speaking task that we're doing. And this is another technique that's an example of that. This is the power chat. The power chat is designed to maximize speaking focus. Maximize speaking focus. And the idea between a power chat is that you set a question, you set a challenge, and you set a timer. So the power behind the power chat comes from the challenge and the timer. This is something that as a teacher you can control. You can make this easier or harder. You can differentiate your challenges. So, for example, if you've got students in different groups, if you've got confident speakers in one group, you can set a harder challenge for that group. And if you have less confident students in another group, you can set a slightly easier challenge. As a teacher, you can control that. You can also control the timer as well. So this is an example from a talk about text discussion question. This is a book from level 2, which is called A True Leader. Very nice social science topic to be discussing, and a very good springboard for discussions about good behavior and what we should and we shouldn't do. This book is all about deciding what are the qualities to be a good leader in our classroom, in our home, in our family, and in the world. So we start by setting a question. And our question will be, do you think Ali would be a good leader? Why or why not? So there's our question. We've set our question. Now, we then set the challenge. Now, this challenge level might be something very simple. Together, think of 3 reasons why or why not. A simple challenge. It might be a slightly harder challenge. Okay, so think of 3 things that make him a good leader and 3 things that maybe don't make him a good leader. We also then need to set the timer, and the timer indicates how long that focus chat is going on for. Now, this is a brainstorming activity. It's an initial thinking activity. That timer does not need to be long. We also need to think about it being achievable. And Hassan has put a question in the chat box, which we're going to come to in 1 second. Making our speaking tasks achievable is incredibly important, because if the task is not achievable, then the students lose motivation. If I can't do it, I don't want to do it. So Hassan has asked, do we have to force shy students beside encouraging them? And the answer to that, Hassan, is absolutely no. Absolutely no. We hear it all the time. I can't get my child to communicate in English, etc. There is a real fear that exists, and we've talked about safety, and we've talked about making the environment comfortable for learners. By forcing shy students, we're taking that safety away, we're taking that comfort away. So no, absolutely, it's encouragement. And the sad thing is, there is no miracle cure. We cannot make all students confident at the same time. Some of them take longer. But praising what you can do and praising what they are achieving. So, if Hassan, the student, says 1 word in the first lesson, brilliant. Maybe in the second lesson they'll say 2 and 3. TTT, things take time. So true, Ali. So true. I've never seen that before. That is very, very good. Things take time. Um, and as frustrating as that can be for teachers, for parents, and for the students themselves, it is very, very true. Right. Now, what about facing their fear? Facing fear, yes, it has to happen, but you have to have the environment right, and making sure that when we're facing fear, we are facing fear in an achievable way, and remembering that what is achievable for Ali and what is achievable for Alfia might be different, and we have to work with those students individually. Yes, facing fear, but you can only face fear when you feel that you will be okay. All right, now the next technique we're going to talk about is about inquiry jars. And inquiry jars for me have been an absolute blessing in online teaching because they generate curiosity. Now, you'll notice this image here of the little inquiry jar. I have one right next to me. There's mine. Oop, there you go. You can see there. We've all got one of these in our house. If you don't know where it is, ask whoever does the cooking. We all have an empty jar in the house. So as a teacher, they are a very useful thing. And they're also something that students can build and make for themselves. The idea behind an inquiry jar is that they are prompting interest, they're prompting curiosity, and they are prompting discussion. So I am going to demonstrate this to you. I'm going to open my inquiry jar. Now, in my inquiry jar, I will hold it up to the camera. Is there anything you can see straight away? What can you identify in here? Can you type any words in the chat box of the things you can see in my inquiry jar? What is that thing? Anybody know? Oh, there's a bulb. There is a billiard ball. Oh, it's not a billiard ball. We'll have a look in a second. All right, I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to take the lid off. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to smell my inquiry jar. And something in here smells delicious. It smells really good. Shall I see what's in there? Whoa. Now, let me see. Oh no, I have a stuck. I have a traffic jam. What is this amazing smell? There's my amazing smell. Can anyone identify what this is? Smells so good. Rosemary. It's not rosemary. It looks very, very similar though. It's lavender. There we go. Kai's in there. Okay. All right. It's definitely lavender. I can smell it. Here's another thing in my inquiries box that smells good. What's that? Cocoa powder. It doesn't just smell good, it tastes good too. Whoa, what's that one? And then cocoa powder, absolutely. And here's, what's this? Can we see? A little rattle. It's a little bell, actually. There we go. And then I've got this, which is an interesting piece of rock. And if I feel it, it feels very smooth. And some of you noticed this as well. What have we got here? Someone said a bulb earlier. What type of bulb is it? A light bulb, indeed. Spot bulb, absolutely. So, inquiry jars are lovely. As a teacher, they are used for guided inquiry. So what we're talking about with guided inquiry, we're talking about a theme, we're talking about a topic. And that's my question for you, Natalia. Natalia is asking how they are connected. So can anybody see a connection between the things in my jar? We had stuff that tastes good, stuff that smells good, stuff that helps us to see in the dark, stuff that, there we go, Srilekha has got it, Hassan has got it. Yeah, they are sensory, it's our senses. So all of my inquiry jar is connected to this book that you can see on screen, the book My Senses. And it's a guided inquiry technique. So we are focusing our discussion down a channel. I am using questions that help keep the students on task. The objects are all connected to the theme. It's a guided inquiry. Of course, if you want to maximize the speaking even further, we can set the theme for homework. So we can say, okay, children, for homework tonight, you're going to make a new inquiry jar. I want you to look around your house and I want you to find a lot of little things connected to the theme of the beach. And the students can then go off with their empty jar. They can find different things. And at the beginning of the lesson, instead of being teacher-led, we can put them in pairs and get them to share the different things that they have chosen connected to the topic for their inquiry jar by putting them into breakout rooms. But it's a really nice way of generating interest and generating discussion. Now, moving on from our inquiry jars, another little technique that is very, very important is the idea of restating, talking about things that have happened. In terms of communication, it's probably the thing we communicate about most in a natural conversation. When we're talking to somebody, we're usually telling them something that happened or something someone said. If we're having a chat, if we're having a gossip, the chances are we're going to use language to talk about things that have happened. We're going to need to restate something. Now, one thing that we've said time and time again so far is that students need to feel safe to be able to speak with confidence. One of the things that we can use for that, in Talk About Texts, it's called language for talk. So at the beginning of every Talk About textbook, there will be some useful phrases in the teacher's book. Useful phrases that we need to remind students of, because these are the phrases they will use to talk about the book. In this example, the language for talk is the language we need to tell people our opinion. So in this case, it's a level 2 book. It's a nice early level book. So we're keeping the language for talk simple, and the phrases that our students need to use: I think, or May thinks, Natalia thinks, Shaden thinks, Hassan thinks. So simple phrases, 2 phrases we want them to use to talk about it. Language for talk, I thoroughly recommend in a physical classroom having all of these on posters around the wall. Any key classroom phrases that our students need, that we need to remind them about, pop them up on the wall, having something there to point to. In and online, you can always have a phrase bank somewhere on your screen. So something that you can easily show, make a pretty slide for different phrases that you can run through in the classroom. But make sure that we're preparing the language for talk, the phrases that they need to talk about the answer. Now, in this case, this is a way of practicing telling people what other people think, restating. So in this activity, what we would do is we would ask a question. In this case, our book here is The Underground City. So I might ask a question like, why do you think people in the city live underground? There's my question. I'm going to put my question up on the board. And the first task is to pair those students. So working together in pairs. I think blah, 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 blah. I think blah, 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 blah. Brilliant. 2 minutes, share our ideas. Next step is to repair and report. Actually, much easier in an online classroom, especially if you're teaching with Zoom. So you can just change the pairs in the breakout rooms, reshuffle, change them, find a new partner. In the classroom, it takes a little bit more time because somebody has to stand up and everybody has to change and swap partners. Online, super easy. Click of a button, reorganize, get a new partner. With your new partner, then, the idea is that you tell your partner what you thought, your first idea, and you also tell your new partner what your old partner said as well. So it's a nice, straightforward way to get that done. Now, all of these activities are practicing different corners of that oral language pie. In the classroom, when we're planning our lessons, when we're planning what we're doing, think about that progression. Step by step, how can you build to practicing all of those areas. Okay, so we've seen a number of activities. Very, very quickly, share it. Give me one thought, one feeling, one comment or question so far about any of these activities. Which is your favorite? Which do you want to do? Are there any that confuse you? Share it, share it, share it. Type it in the chat box. Okay. The jar, says Sima. Sima, is that something you want to try? It's lovely. You can, and you get to, yeah, you get to make it all pretty. Like, look, you can put little glitter, you can paint it. So much fun. Everybody loves the jar. Ooh, Justine says you always use Power Chat. That's brilliant. Yes, of course, Irina, you can definitely use an inquiry jar with an older student, although you might want to make it slightly different, you know. It doesn't have to be a jar, could be anything. But yeah, you can totally use it. I've just used it with you and you enjoyed it, and all of you are adults. Yeah, so Justine, I'd be interested to hear, like, how do you find Power Chat techniques in the classroom? Do they work from you? Oh, maybe Hassan, I should start some sort of Etsy shop selling inquiry jars for teachers. Really much easier just to make your own, I promise. Rather than you wasting waiting all of the time that it would take me to send them. Okay. All right. Now, what we have to remember is that our time in the classroom is limited. Do we all know what the word asynchronous means? If you had never seen it before the beginning of 2020, the chances are by the end of 2020, you had at least met the word asynchronous before. If you are not familiar, asynchronous means done at different times. So if something is synchronized or synchronous, we are doing it simultaneously. If it's asynchronous, it is not simultaneously. So if we're teaching online, our synchronous teaching is when we are all together like we are now. Our asynchronous teaching is the stuff they do at their own time. Homework, let's say. Okay, so asynchronous speaking is much, much easier in an online classroom than it is in an offline classroom. Actually, no, because we can do all of these things when we're teaching in a face-to-face classroom. We just didn't really think about doing it. Lots and lots and lots of different techniques that we can use to encourage speaking to happen outside of the classroom. And the amazing thing that we have at our disposal is our computers. Me talking to you like this right now is brilliant. Me being able to sit at my computer and record audio files, video files, to re-record my spoken language, even better. We like it. And of course, our learners will often self-edit. They will often feel encouraged and empowered to re-record and re-record until they get it just right before they give it to the teacher. It encourages accuracy. It encourages self-assessment. It encourages consideration. And there's lots of different ways that we can use recordings in the classroom. Modeling. Little activities that you can do. So as a teacher, you can record yourself or you can use an example from the audiobook. And the idea for providing a model is that the students need to recreate that model. So if I read a sentence, maybe as a teacher, I'm going to read a sentence in 3 moods. So I might be happy. The cat is here. I might be angry. The cat is here. Or I might be sad. The cat is here. And I would read that sentence in 3 ways, show that emotion in my voice, and then I would ask the students to record that sentence and try to match me. Descriptions are something that's so easy to set up. You know, you might ask the students to walk around their house, show me your bedroom, make a video. So they walk around with their camera and they talk about everything they can see. They could be describing anything, describing the view out of their window, a TV show they did last night. Could be audio, could be video. Reports are lovely. They can be done face to face, they can be done at home. You can do a report on anything. So it might be, you know, a report on how healthy is the contents of my fridge, etc. Give them something to measure, give them something to find out about, and get them to make a little video. And of course, interviews. They can be great for building school home connections, getting students to interview family members about questions. So find the oldest person in your family, ask them the questions from the unit about life in their town when they were your age. Talking about history, bringing in cross-curricular ideas as well. And of course, they can be done face-to-face at home. You can also get students to set up a little Zoom chat and record their Zoom chat where they can interview each other asynchronously. So lots and lots of things that we can do. And just to say, with the recordings, really, really useful, really does maximize exposure to language. It promotes those ideas of drafting and redrafting, not being happy with your first response, trying to get better. And re-recording that encourages that accuracy, encourages that self-assessment as well. So don't forget, speaking is not just for one online moment or one in the classroom moment. We have tools that we can use to get lots of speaking happening when we're not online. Now, I'm going to leave you with a final thought. And when it comes to English, and we look at all of the skills that are involved in English, we know that they are interdependent. You have to have confidence across all of the board. But back in 2006, there was a report on fluency here in the UK, the Rose Report, and it looked into English development in the UK and how well students were doing it. And one of the key findings of this Rose Report, which was then used to rewrite the curriculum, so it was quite a big, important report here in the UK. It's like, if they can't say it, they can't write it, has become something of a cliche, which nevertheless captures the nature of the interdependencies of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. There's a reason why parents complain if their students or their children do not get enough opportunity to speak. Speaking about things is one of the most important ways that we make sense of the world around us. So when we maximize speaking, we're maximizing all of those other skills as well. All right. That is all I have to say to you. So if you do have any questions, get them in the chat box now and I will do my best to answer them. In the meantime, thank you all for your ideas and for sharing your thoughts throughout the presentation today. As I said, you will be getting copies of the slides. That will come through to you at the end. You will also have a link to get the recording of this presentation as well. So if you want to go back and re-watch things and check if I spelt inquiry like an American or a British person, because I'm never quite sure anymore, you can go back there. How to deal with dominant students. Yeah, it's a big challenge, isn't it, Hassan? Very, 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 very difficult. And there are lots and lots of different techniques that you can do. So some teachers will always say that giving students roles can control how dominant students are. Sometimes it can be about the way that we pair students together. So trying to keep the dominant students away from the weaker students, pairing them by their dominance levels. So all of the most dominant students are working together. They can compete with each other, while the less dominant students have to use language if they are working together. There are loads and loads of different answers out there. The problem is there is not a right answer. Personally, I have found that some techniques work with student A, but if I have success with student A, student B will have a different result. So my recommendation would always be, if you have a specific problem, get a list of possible solutions and work them through. Tatiana asks what to do with students of different levels. Again, it's a case of experimentation. Find as many different techniques as you can and try them, because every teaching context is different. Every learner is different. We know that class A and class B may be studying the same lesson, but the outcome will be different. So when it comes to any sort of problems encouraging fluency, the best thing that you can do is research, find yourself maybe 5, 6, 7, 28 possible solutions, and just progress through them until you find the one that works. What was that TTT? Things take time. Improving pronunciation of very young learners. Practice drilling. Songs are amazing for pronunciation. Chants are amazing for pronunciation, and have fun with it. Yeah, and just give them the opportunities. Children are very, very good at mimicking sound and language. That is their natural ability. So as long as you are giving them exposure to good pronunciation, they will pick it up. What to do with very high individual differences? Group work. Really, group work. It's all you can do. And making sure that when you are planning, you can think of one way to add challenge and one way to take challenge away. Being ready for that. All right. Lots and lots of questions. I am going to hand you back over to Rainer for a couple of minutes. I'm sorry if I don't have time to answer everybody's questions, but it's always brilliant to see them. So, Rainer, a little bit of information for the rest of the session, I think. Thank you.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Firstly, I think I would buy the inquiry jar. So if Charlotte's looking to make them, I would be someone who would purchase that. So if there's any opportunity, Charlotte, I think it's a new business venture. So just to say, as always, thank you so much to Charlotte. I did see a few messages about not receiving previous PowerPoints. Please do email us if you don't receive previous PowerPoints, but also do take some time to wait for those, because we do have a lot of webinars running. So give it a few weeks before you do contact us, because it is probably on the way. So with the PowerPoint and webinar recording for this session, it will be available in 2 weeks via email, CPD certificate as soon as the webinar finishes. Do follow us on social media, and also we look forward to seeing you in an upcoming session soon. Take care for now. Thank you as always, and stay safe. Bye.